following podcast is brought to you by A.C.T, Agora's Center of Thought. Here only on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Every Saturday, 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on the dark side of radio. Agora, Anarchy, Action. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Agora Underground. As you know, it is November 22nd, and we are live 8 to 9 p.m. every Saturday here on the Voluntarily Virtuous Network. Voluntary Virtues Network, brought to you by Mike Shanklin. And Voluntary Virtues do appreciate you guys listening in. As you know, this show, the Agora Underground, is dedicated to agorism, promoting agorism, its proper terms and its proper understanding philosophically and ideologically. And we have been going through Konkin's classic works, as you well know. And we're going to dive into Rothbard's magnus opus here, Man, Economy, and State, more specifically, Power and Market. So I do thank y'all for tuning in. We have quite a show lined up for you. I am your host, Comrade Dick, and this is the Agora Underground. So we do appreciate you tuning in. I don't have any other co-hosts here with me today, so we'll be doing this solo, but it's not a problem, is it? Hope everyone has had a great week so far in liberty, a great week in anarchy, great week as far as developing your talents and producing things. So I do hope you were successful and productive in all your endeavors, as we should strive always to be. So for those that may not know, Murray and Rothbard wrote a massive book, treatise on economics, known as titled Man, Economy, and State. And essentially, there was a second part of the book here, which really can be a book in itself, considering it's about 400 pages long. But the second part of this book here is called Power and Market. Now, I don't think we can spend 2 years or so reading Man, Economy, and State, though we might tackle that sometime in the future. Who knows? But Power and Market is essential. It's essential to really understanding what it is we're calling for here as anarcho-capitalists, as voluntarists, as agorists. We're calling for a completely voluntary and privatized system of law and enforcement of those laws, including but not limited to security and protection services, right? And arbitration, private arbitration. So let's get into this, because this really outlines it. Rothbard really, he's the first one to coin the term anarcho-capitalism, and he really, though not the first one to articulate the need for private competition in the monopolized services of the state, but he was the first to really outline a solid proposal for how a stateless society could function, a voluntary stateless society. So let's just dive right into this. We will dedicate this episode to Chapter 1 of Power and Market. This chapter is entitled Defense Services on the Free Market. And Rothbard begins by saying, quote, "Economists have referred innumerable times to the free market as the social array of voluntary exchanges of goods and services. But despite this abundance of treatment, their analysis has slighted the deeper implications of free exchange. Thus, there has been general neglect of the fact that free exchange means exchange of titles of ownership to property. and that therefore the economist is obliged to inquire into the conditions and the nature of the property ownership that would be obtained in a free society. In a free society, if a free society means a world in which no one aggresses against the person or property of another, then this implies a society in which every man has the absolute right of property in his own self and in the previously unowned natural resources that he finds, transforms by his own labor, and then gives to or exchanges with others. A firm property right in one's own self and the resources that one finds and transforms and gives or exchanges leads to the property structure that is found in free market capitalism. Thus, an economist cannot fully analyze the exchange structure of a free market without setting forth the theory of property rights, of justice in property, that would have to be obtained in a free market society. In our analysis of the free market and man, economy, and state, we assume that no invasion of property takes place there, either because everyone voluntarily refrains from such an aggression, or because whatever method of forcible defense exists on the free market is sufficient to prevent any such aggression. But economists have almost invariably and paradoxically, paradoxically assumed that the free market must be kept free by the use of invasive and unfree actions. In short, by governmental institutions outside of the free market nexus. A supply of defense services on the free market would mean maintaining the axiom of the free society, namely that there be no use of physical force except in defense against those using force to invade personal property. This would imply the complete absence of a state apparatus or government. For the state, unlike all other persons and institutions of society, acquires its revenue not by exchanges freely contracted upon, but by a system of unilateral coercion called taxation. Defense in a free society, including such defense services to person and property as police protection and judicial findings, would therefore have to be supplied by people or firms who A. gained their revenue voluntarily rather than by coercion, and B. did not, as the state does, arrogate to themselves a compulsory monopoly of police or judicial protection. Only such libertarian provisions of defense services would be consonant with a free market and a free society. Thus, defense firms would have to be as freely competitive and as non coercive against non invaders as are all other suppliers of goods and services on the free market. Defense services, like all other services, would be marketable, and marketable only. Those economists and others who espouse the philosophy of laissez faire believe the freedom of the market should be upheld and that property rights must not be invaded. Nevertheless, they strongly believe that defense service cannot be supplied by the market, and that defense against invasion of property must therefore be supplied outside the free market by the coercive force of the government. In arguing thus, they are caught in an insoluble contradiction, for they sanction and advocate massive invasion of property by the very agency, government, that is supposed to defend people against invasion. For a laissez faire government would necessarily have to seize its revenue by the invasion of property, called taxation, and would arrogate to itself a compulsory monopoly of defense service over some arbitrarily designated territorial area. The laissez faire theorists, who are here joined by almost all other writers, attempt to redeem their position from this glaring contradiction by asserting that a purely free market defense service could not exist, and that therefore those who value highly a forcible defense against violence would have to fall back on the state. despite its black historical record as the great engine of invasive violence. But they would fall back on the state as a necessary evil for the protection of person and property. The laissez-fairist offers several objections to the idea of free market defense. And we have a dog barking, yay. Sorry about that. Let me get this guy out of here real quick. So the laissez-faire sees this as a necessary evil for the protection of person and property. The laissez-fairist offers several objections to the idea of free market defense. One objection holds that since a free market of exchanges presupposes a system of property rights, therefore the state is needed to define and allocate the structure of such rights. We have seen that the principles of a free society do imply a very definite theory of property rights, namely self-ownership and the ownership of natural resources found and transformed by one's labor. Therefore, no state or similar agency, contrary to the market, is needed to define or allocate property rights. This can and will be done by the use of reason and through market processes themselves. Any other allocation or definition would be completely arbitrary and contrary to the principles of a free society. A similar doctrine holds that defense must be supplied by a state because of the unique status of defense as a necessary precondition of market activity, as a function without which a market economy could not exist. Yet, this argument is a non sequitur that proves far too much. It was the fallacy of the classical economists to consider goods and services in terms of large classes. Instead, modern economics demonstrates that services must be considered in terms of marginal units. For all allocations on the market are marginal. If we begin to treat whole classes instead of marginal units, we can discover a great myriad of necessary, indispensable goods and services, all of which might be considered as preconditions of market activity. Is not land room vital, or food for each participant, or clothing or shelter? Can a market long exist without them? And what of paper, which has become a basic requisite of market activity in the complex modern economy? Must all these goods and services therefore be supplied by the state and the state only? The laissez-fairist also assumes that there must be a single compulsory monopoly of coercion and decision-making in society, that there must, for example, be one Supreme Court to hand down final and unquestioned decisions. But he fails to recognize that the world has lived quite well throughout its existence without a single ultimate decision maker over the whole inhabited surface. The Argentinian, for example, lives in a state of anarchy, of non government in relation to the citizen of Uruguay or of Ceylon. And yet, the private citizens of these and other countries live and trade together without getting into insoluble legal conflicts, despite the absence of a common governmental ruler. The Argentinian who believes that he has been aggressed upon by the Ceylonese, for example, takes his grievance to an Argentinian court and its decision is recognized by the Ceylonese courts, and vice versa. If the Ceylonese is the aggrieved party, although it is true that the separate nation states have warred interminably against each other, the private citizens of various countries, despite widely differing legal systems, have managed to live together in harmony without having a single government over them. If the citizens of northern Montana and of Saskatchewan across the border can live and trade together in harmony without a common government, so can the citizens of northern and southern Montana. In short, the present day boundaries of nations are purely historical and arbitrary, and there is no more need for a monopoly government over the citizens of one country than there is for one between the citizens of two different nations. It is all the more curious, incidentally, that while laissez-faireists should by the logic of their position be ardent believers in a single unified world government, so that no one will live in a state of anarchy in relation to anyone else, they almost never are. And once one concedes that a single world government is not necessary, then where does one logically stop at the permissibility of separate states? If Canada and the United States can be separate nations without being denounced as being in a state of impermissible anarchy, why may not the South secede from the United States? New York State from the Union? New York City from the state? Why may not Manhattan secede? Each neighborhood, each block, each house, each person. But of course, if each person may secede from government, we have virtually arrived at the purely free society where defense is supplied along with all other services by the free market, and wherein the invasive state has ceased to exist. The role of a freely competitive judiciaries has in fact been far more important in history of the West than is often recognized. The law merchant, admiralty law, and much of the common law began to be developed by private competitive judges who were sought out by litigants for their expertise in understanding the legal areas involved. The fairs of Champagne, the great marts of the international trade of the Middle Ages, enjoyed freely competitive courts, and people could patronize those that they deemed most accurate and efficient. Let us then examine in a little more detail what a free market defense system might look like. It is, we must realize, impossible to blueprint the exact institutional conditions of any market in advance, just as it would have been impossible 50 years ago to predict the exact structure of the television industry today. However, we can postulate some of the workings of a freely competitive, marketable system of police and judicial services. Most likely, such services would be sold on a advanced subscription basis, with premiums paid regularly and services to be supplied on call. Many competitors would undoubtedly arise, each attempting, by earning a reputation for efficiency and probity, to win a consumer market for its services. Of course, it is possible that in some areas a single agency would outcompete all others, but this does not seem likely when we realize that there is no territorial monopoly and that efficient firms would be able to open up branches in other geographical areas. It seems likely also that supplies of police and judicial services would be provided by insurance companies because it would be to their direct advantage to reduce the amount of crime as much as possible. One common objection to the feasibility of market protection, its desirability is not the problem here, runs as follows. Suppose that Jones contributes and subscribes to Defense Agency X, and Smith subscribes to Defense Agency Y. We will assume, for convenience, that the defense agency includes a police force and a court or courts, although in practice these two functions might well be performed by separate firms. Smith alleges that he has been assaulted or robbed by Jones. Jones denies the charge. How then is justice to be dispensed? Clearly, Smith will file charges against Jones, and institute suit or trial proceedings in the Y court system. Jones is invited to defend himself against the charges. Although there can be no subpoena power, since any sort of force used against a man not yet convicted of a crime is itself an invasive and criminal act that cannot be consonant with a free society that we have been postulating. But if Jones is declared innocent, or if he is declared guilty and consents to the finding, then there is no problem on this level, and the Y court then institutes suitable measures of punishment. But what if Jones challenges the finding? In that case, he can either take the case to his court, Court X, or take it directly to a privately competing appeals court of a type that would undoubtedly spring up in abundance for the market to fill the great needs for such tribunals. Probably there will be just a few appeal courts, far fewer than the number of primary courts, and each of the lower courts will boast to its customers about it being members of those appeal court systems, noted for their efficiency and probity. The appeals court decision, then, can be taken by the society as binding. Indeed, in the basic legal code of a free society, there probably would be enshrined some such clause as that the decision of any two courts will be considered binding, i.e., will be the point at which the court will be able to take action against the party adjudged guilty. Every legal system needs some sort of socially agreed upon cutoff point, a point at which judicial procedure stops and punishment against the convicted criminal begins. But a single monopoly court of ultimate decision making need not be imposed, and of course cannot be in a free society. And a libertarian legal code might well have two court cutoff points, since there are always two consenting parties, the plaintiff and the defendant. Another common objection to the workability of a free market defense may be that may not one or more of the defense agencies turn its coercive power to criminal use? In short, may not a private police agency use its force to aggress against others? Or may not a private court collude to make fraudulent decisions and thus aggress against its subscribers and victims? It is very generally assumed that those who postulate a stateless society are also naive enough to believe that in such a society all men would be good and no one would wish to aggress against his neighbor. There is no need to assume any such magical or miraculous change in the human nature. Of course, some of the private defense agencies will become criminal, just as some people become criminal now. But the point is that in a stateless society, there would be no regular, legalized channel for crime and aggression, no government apparatus, the control of which provides a secure monopoly for invasion of person and property. When a state exists, there does not exist such a built-in channel, namely the coercive taxation power and the compulsory monopoly of forcible protection. In a purely free market society, a would-be criminal police or judiciary would find it very difficult to take power, since there would be no organized state apparatus to seize and use as the instrumentality of command. To create such an instrumentality de novo is very difficult and indeed almost impossible. Historically, it took state rulers centuries to establish a functioning state apparatus. Furthermore, the purely free market, stateless society would contain within itself a system of built-in checks and balances that would make it almost impossible for such organized crime to succeed. There has been much talk about checks and balances in the American system, but these can scarcely be considered checks at all. since every one of these institutions is an agency of the central government and eventually of the ruling party of that government. The checks and balances in the stateless society consist precisely in the free market, i.e., the existence of freely competitive police and judicial agencies that could be quickly be mobilized to put down any outlaw agency. Is it true that there can be no absolute guarantee that a purely free market society would not fall prey to organized criminality? But this concept is far more workable than the truly utopian idea of a strictly limited government, an idea that has never worked historically, and understandably so, for the state's built in monopoly of aggression and inherent absence of free market checks has enabled it to burst easily any bonds that well meaning people have tried to place on it. Finally, the worst that could possibly happen would be for the state to be reestablished. And since the state is what we have now, any experimentation with a stateless society would have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Many economists object to the marketable defense on the grounds that defense is one of the alleged categories of collective goods that can be supplied only by the state. This fallacious theory is refuted elsewhere, and two of the very few economists who have conceded the possibility of a free market defense have written such. Quote, if then individuals were willing to pay sufficiently high prices, protection, general education, recreation, the army, navy, police departments, schools, and parks might be provided through individual initiative as well as food, clothing, and automobiles. And that's Merlin H. Hunter and Harry K. Allen from Principles of Public Finance, 1940. Actually, Hunter and Allen greatly understand the workability of private action in providing these services. For a compulsory monopoly gaining its revenue out of generalized coercion than by voluntary payment of its customers is bound to be strikingly less efficient than a free, competitive, private enterprise supply of such services. The price paid would be a great gain to society and to the consumers rather than an imposed extra cost. Thus, a truly free market is totally incompatible with the existence of a state, an institution that presumes to defend person and property by itself, subsisting on the unilateral coercion against private property, known as taxation. On the free market, defense against violence would be a service like any other, obtainable from freely competitive private organizations. Whatever problems remain in this area could easily be solved in practice by the market process, the very process which has solved countless organizational problems of far greater intricacy. Those laissez faire economists and writers, past and present, who have stopped short at the impossibility, uh, who have stopped short at the impossibly utopian ideal of a limited government, unfortunately are trapped in a grave inner contradiction. This contradiction, a laissez faire, was lucidly exposed by the British political philosopher Auburn Herbert. Quote, A is to compel B to cooperate with him, or B to compel A. But in any case, cooperation cannot be secured, as we are told, unless through all time one section is compelling another section to form a state. Very good. But then what has become of our system of individualism? A has got hold of B, or B of A, and has forced him into a system of which he disapproves, extracts services in payment from him which he does not wish to render, has virtually become his master. What is all this but socialism on a reduced scale? Believing then that the judgment of every individual who has not aggressed against his neighbor is supreme as regards as his actions, and that this is the rock on which individualism rests, I deny that A and B can go to C and force him to form a state and extract from him certain payments and services in the name of such state. And I go on to maintain that if you act in this manner, you at once justify state socialism. Auburn Herbert from Taxation and Anarchism, 1912. And that is the first chapter, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very good points up in here. It's just at least a handful there that I was making mental note of. That this isn't the first time I've read this chapter, and it these points kept coming up, and they just kind of solidified here in my mind. One being that unfortunately laissez-faire or small government types, which we would consider our classical liberals, or liberals by definition, right? By name, by title, would be people that want a limited and controlled government. You're constitutionalists. You're old guard, right? You're old right. You're non-interventionist old right. Unfortunately, they're in a huge contradiction, aren't they? Several of them. The first one Rothbard brought up is, if the market is so great, according to these people, which anyone that studies any kind of economic 101, the true economics 101 would quickly see that that's the case. But point being is that if a government's so corrupt, according to laissez-faire, and most things can be provided by the state, or most things can't be provided by the state. I'm sorry. Most things can be provided by the state. Why are we then going to force a non-market nexus, right, as Rothbard put it, outside of the market nexus, right? Why are we going to put a governmental institution on top of society, commanding and controlling every little aspect of it, or even just relegating it to defense and arbitration, right? It's still you're still creating an institution that exists outside of voluntary transaction. So I thought that was a really great point. Another really interesting point is how most people bring up as an excuse to not accept anarchy, to not just go ahead and mentally acknowledge anarchy, right? It's impossible, it's improbable, it's utopian. Is they'll say, well, what are we going to do when people get into a conflict? There's going to be a fight, right? Eventually people are going to get into a debate, a fight, and this is going to lead to a need for court services of some kind, right? How would we deal with that? I love how Rothbard takes that analogy to his extreme and points out how hey, well, guess what? Nation states don't have an overseeing government making sure that nation states don't get into conflicts that can't be resolved, right? So by logical extension, if you believe that we need government in order to deal with crime, in order to deal with the courts, contracts, enforcing these things, well, guess what? I guess we need world government, don't we? Because what's going to stop countries from getting into conflicts and breaking treaties and contracts? And who's going to enforce those treaties and contracts? And how are those things going to be determined? So, the logical extension of that argument, that government is necessary because there is conflict in society, leads you to world government, ladies and gentlemen. So good luck with that one. It kind of seems like all these diehard patriot nationalists, gun-toting flag waving patriots, right, are seems like the logical conclusion of their patriotism is actually the New World Order, isn't it? The global court, the United Nations. So we'll see. We'll see if they wake up or not. I love the point here also that the third point that Rothbard made is that a lot of classical economists, and this would include Smith and the London School and uh, or the classical school and the London School, the Keynes, um, and what Marxist school, right? Um, the Chicago School. I mean, they're all trying to all these economic branches or schools of thought when it comes to economics. Um, I don't even. I'm not too familiar if Proudhon did this or not, but I'm sure he did. So we can even throw in the mutualist economic school there. They all focus on quantifying economics, right? They want to put in other words, they want to step back and look at the grand picture and see how much wheat is being traded and see how many people are dependent on people for providing security services, and they'll step back and see how many people are being educated in the school system, and they'll conclude from such things, from such um, you know displaced, or I guess far isolated uh, grand picture of the economy, they'll presume that these large transactions, all this food and the major things that are the big blocks of what's being traded here, they assume that those things must be provided by the state because they assume they're prerequisites for the free market itself, right? So they'll assume that, oh, look at all this food and grains that's being traded here. Well, they're assuming that you need food before you can have a free market, right? So then their conclusion is, well, let's have government provide food, and then that way we can have the free market. So they extend that to security as well, right? They'll see the economy as a grand scale, and they'll see, oh, look at how many people are paying for health insurance, right? Uh, and they'll assume, well, we can't have the free market, we can't have capitalism unless we have health insurance, right? Brought to you by the government. Uh, and just extend that to defense services, military services, police services, security services. Look how many people that depend on security services. This must be provided by the state, by an institution outside of the market, because it's a prerequisite, is what they see it as. But that's a false notion, because as Rothbard pointed out, um, that's not how economics is analyzed, right? You can step back and look at the grand scale of the universe all you want. That's not really going to tell you how individual stars function, right? You can sit there and watch a whole galaxy, but that isn't going to tell you about individual stars. It isn't going to tell you much, at least. So it's not until we go into the marginal units that Rothbard pointed out that we start seeing that you know it's no different than any other good, right? Everything is on the marginal demand. Everyone has their own marginal utility. Everyone has their own uh, subjective theory of value, what they consider to be valuable, and it varies from person to person. And because of that, because each person is their own acting individual human being with determination and the willpower to transform the world around them, the physical world around them, this inevitably leads to to the conclusion that these things can be provided on a one-on-one basis, right? So I really did like that point. That was really, really good. And then just hammering it home here. I mean that prior point about the necessity for world government in order to keep everyone in line. I like what he said here. If he said here, Robert, if Canada and the United States can be separate nations without being denounced as being in a state of impermissible anarchy, why may not the South secede from the United States? Right. So he's taking the laissez-faire argument here, right? This would be an argument to bring up to our rightist buddies, our Republican buddies. And by buddies, I mean, I say that the same way as we have our Democratic buddies and our communist buddies, and we have our fascist buddies. I mean, buddies is a nice term for closed-minded politicos, but I say that to be nice because we're trying to reach people's minds and hearts here, and we're actually trying sincerely convert people into humanity here. Um, but to our Republican buddies, to our laissez-faire buddies, to our small government, limited government constitutionalists, we need to ask them, hey, well, if we need the state to in order to make sure that no one gets into a fight, or there's a resolution in any kind of conflict, well, then we need world government, right? And then once they're willing to conclude that, well, no, we don't need world government, nation states can govern themselves, right? Once they can come to the conclusion uh, that because you can then flip that, because obviously they'll say, well, no, we don't need world government. So then you can flip it and say, well, what's keeping Canada and the United States from being in anarchy with each other? What's keeping Canada from invading the United States, and who's going to solve that conflict? So it's really good. It's the ultimate logical basis for secession of the individual. So here, Rothbard went on to say that if Canada and the United States can be separate nations without being denounced as being in a state of impermissible anarchy, why may not the South secede from the United States, or New York State from the Union, New York City from the state? Why may not Manhattan secede, each neighborhood, each block, each house, each person? I love that. I love that. I mean, once a laissez-faire, once a small government person, a Republican, a constitutionalist, a statist libertarian, right, a small government libertarian, once they can admit the fact that we don't need world government in order to keep nation states from getting into conflict, and once they can admit the fact that nation states have, sovereignty in quotations. I don't know who has that sovereignty, since we know that nation states are just abstract notions, but anywho, once they can come to to accept that, then really them accepting secession down to the individual is right in line with their thinking. They're going to have to become an anarchist at that point. So I think those are really two great ways to introduce anarchy into small government type of political minded people. And then he brought up some of the issues that people have with defense agencies. What if I remember one that I get from a lot of the crowds that tend to be a little bit more socialist leaning people. They always think that somehow this any one of these defense agencies is just going to somehow like oppress some neighborhood, right? Come in and get a contract with a neighborhood or something, and then 6 months into their year-long contract or something, they get all tyrannical and start putting the neighborhood to slavery and into slave labor and or I don't know what the heck what it would be doing, but the idea of somehow these private agencies taking control of society and running society just like governments do, and setting all these rules and boundaries is just, it's a ridiculous notion once you really start to understand how complex a privatized society would be. And by complex, I mean how decentralized, in fact, a private stateless society would be. Um, you know, first of all, right? If war is very costly. I mean, I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with the tallies here, but I mean, the United States has spent trillions of dollars, trillions and trillions of dollars on the last couple war efforts, just in the last couple years, right? Trillions of dollars here at our expense, right? Through the purse, through the public purse. Just go ahead and stick it to the taxation of future unborn babies, and Let's go ahead and just print it through their central bank. But so trillions of dollars spent for warfare, and people really think that somehow we're going to have private institutions take over and conduct just the same amount of warfare on the same scale. Really, trillions of dollars. I'm curious as to where they would be getting all that money from. If it's from their customers, then they're pleasing one group of people in order to control and oppress another group, and that usually doesn't really work out too well, right? Especially in a stateless society where people would understand the non-aggression principle, and people would no longer want to go back to statism, no longer want to go back to unnecessary aggression. Well, then guess what? Firms that are being aggressive are going to be completely rejected, aren't they? People are going to cancel their premiums with these defense companies. People are no longer going to want to associate, want to invest into these groups, right? And even if you let's get hypothetical on the other end of things. Let's assume that a bunch of a big cabal of you know gangsters gets together, a bunch of statists get together, put their money in a big basket in order to form this agency and take over society, take over the world. Like we were saying, I mean, that's still a lot of money that they're going to have to earn through the market, right? They're not going to be able to print out of their centralized bank and force everybody else to use their currency. They're not going to be able to tax everybody, right? And get pennies on every dollar transaction that all these individuals are having, right? So I really don't know where any agency would get trillions of dollars. I mean, to be able to wage warfare. Um, in fact, and in fact, if that was the case, we would see it. We would see it happening already, wouldn't we? If corporations had the ability to do what government does, then what would stop any other insurance company or security agency from taking over physically, taking over by force? What would stop that? I mean, do we see Geico and Progressive, car insurance companies? Do we see them battling it out, battle royale? Do we see them fighting to the death on a battlefield over claims, which, mind you, can get up to be a lot of money? I mean, if you run into a family and their insurance covered, medical costs and all that, well, your insurance is gonna the person guilty, their insurance is gonna have to cough up a lot of money, right? We're talking about dozens and dozens of thousands of dollars here, $20,000, $30,000. I mean, especially for a whole family having to go, multiple surgeries. Who knows? Um, that's a lot of money. I mean, do we see Geico and Progressive battling it out on a battlefield? Because one owes the other person a lot of money? No, we don't see that at all. Because war is expensive, right? They know that their Progressive knows, or whoever was at fault, in that scenario, that X or Y or Z insurance agency, ABC, whatever, would realize that, hey, you know what? This is one case, right? Our clients are constantly crashing into the other person's clients, and the other company's clients are, constantly crashing into our clients. So there's this mutual exchange of funds going around here. So it's in the incentive of the insurance companies to not throw a fit in a tantrum and like a little kid just storm, burn everything down and storm out on the contract. It's to it's to own up, it's to face up and just pay up, because that you're going to constantly be doing business with these people. I forget the economic term for that, but it's a notion that it comes up with the food regulatory agencies a lot. People thinking that if we didn't have government, somehow we'd be eating poison or whatever at the restaurants, or if we didn't have the FDA to protect us, we'd be poisoned. It's like, really? Really, you think somebody's gonna want to poison you, sell you a poisoned sandwich, so that you never come back again? Really, you think that's a viable business plan? Let me sell somebody a spoiled hot dog, and then that way they get the runs, and guess what? They never ever come back to do business with me again. I mean, you're not going to be a successful business person if you do that, right? Every single customer you get, it's going to have to be a brand new customer who has no experience with you and your crappy product or your crappy service, right? I mean, you know how hard it is to get new customers and how hard it is to keep customers happy. It's hard to do. It's hard to do, and it's hard to do, and it's hilarious how people that complain about the market taking over have no experience, little to no experience. I would argue no experience when it, running a business, running any kind of market endeavor. They've never seen the market in action, right? All they see is I don't know, inconvenient truth footage of trash in the ocean or something, and they just assume that's capitalism, or they see the the jungle, the Amazon being burned down, and they assume that's capitalism, right? They don't get it. Let me let this dog out. And that's why you don't do a show with the dog, right? But so that's a common one I get a lot is, well, what would keep these private or agencies from from fully taking over. Um, Another one that I really like, haven't gotten a chance to address to people as of late, because I didn't realize this till recently. But something that comes up quite a bit, especially within the Agorist community, people that are kind of, I mean, they're still principled. If you consider yourself an Agorist, you're a principled anarcho-capitalist, right? There's a lot of people that like the philosophy of agorism, the direct action, the counter economics of agorism, that aren't necessarily anarcho-capitalists, right? Or they wouldn't self-identify as anarcho-capitalists. And one of the major issues that comes up from this crowd, from this crowd in particular, is the idea that basically they have an issue with this private arbitration run by companies, right? They see it as almost like a, I don't know, corporatist structure for society. Now the main issue with this is the following, right? If we usually they propose the solution of localizing, decentralizing and localizing security and arbitration down to like neighborhood levels or block associations and stuff like this, which I have no problem with, right? This is Ancapistan, this is Freedomville, right? You have a right to form any kind of association that you want, so long as it's voluntary. Um, but I do have a slight issue with their proposal, their counter proposal to what Rothbard brought up and what Konkin followed through with. I mean, if you guys remember, we read Konkin, and he was talking about private arbitration agencies and private security agencies in the NLM, New Libertarian Manifesto. So they're both, right, Rothbardian in that sense. So anyway, so people don't like that. The people that tend to have these feelings that maybe these corporations will take over, right? The security agencies will somehow take over and enslave everybody. I don't know what their motivations really are for for offering solution or alternative solutions to this. But like I was saying, they essentially want to localize arbitration and security down to the neighborhood level, which is fine. But there is a problem in that system, localized type of system, if once it were to come to travel, like global conflict, like yeah, I may live here in San Antonio in this certain neighborhood, right? But okay, so they have my back when it comes to security, and they have my back when it comes to arbitration. I got my courts here and everything. But what do I do when I go to Europe for vacation, or if I go to another state for vacation, I go to hang out at whatever, South Carolina with my buddy over there, my buddy Chris. What are you gonna what what are you gonna do then? What if someone you know aggresses upon you? What if someone damages your property when you're completely disconnected from your particular defense agency, from your particular arbitration, because you're not in your neighborhood? I mean, in other words, right? In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the solution needs to be a global solution that we're calling for, and technology allows for this. I mean, the beauty of the silicone and the microchips, and the beauty of computers giving us the power and ability to do this now is to have a fully contractual society, right? One where that is actually civilized, right? And so every individual is going to have so it's going to have to be run through companies. I mean only companies can deal on a global scale, right? I mean, neighborhood associations, I don't know if that can be done through that. I mean, maybe, but I mean, would neighborhood associations have firms and and reps in different parts of the world? I don't see why they would. So really, I mean, the solution needs to be pushed onto the market, not onto, how would I say, communal solutions, right? I mean, communal solutions are great when it comes to more community oriented things like education or food or things like that. I mean, that it seems more probable and more efficient to apply it in those scenarios. But when it comes to security and arbitration in a global society that we live in, I see it very impractical. Um, so, because we want to be able to travel, right? We want to be able to travel and have arbitration wherever. Um, have our DRO, our dispute resolution organization, stand up for us and represent us wherever we may be. So and this inevitably brings in technology to the level where you get all the conspirators and all the New World Order geeks freaking out, right? Because they think it's total information awareness. Because I mean, inevitably, logically, I mean, these companies, these DROs, are going to have profiles of their clients, right? If a company is responsible for backing up your contracts, if a company is responsible for um, protecting you, if a company is responsible for being accountable for you, right? In other words, if you hurt somebody through accident or on purpose, I mean, this other company is going to have to respond in some way. You're the company you have an account with. So they're probably going to have pictures of us. They're probably going to have our information. I mean, this is obvious, right? They're going to have pictures of their clients. Heck, if one agency calls the other and claims that their client stole from their client, how are you going to prove it, right? Well, show me a picture, show me the video footage, and oh yeah, that's our client, yeah, whatever. So I mean, this is gonna brings in the total information awareness, or the facial recognition technology, and all that, and you know uh, the tracking through the technology and everything. But so really, our question, when it comes to that, right? I guess we have three solutions. One of them being two of them being extremely impractical. But either we keep things going, right? We let the state remain, and we allow the state to manage and control the total information, right? The surveillance state, and we'll cross our fingers and uh, hope to God that they don't use it for political reasons, which they always do. And I guess another solution is just smash the computer. Let's just EMP the whole planet and start over when it comes to electronics or something. I don't know what just smash the computer, which is impossible, impractical, impossible. So the only solution, ladies and gentlemen, is the way I see it is, and the inevitable path civilization is going on, is um, distributing all this information as much as we can, right? Um, and making everything voluntary. So even if you didn't want to have a security agency, then no agency would have to have your picture and would have to have all your information. Then again, would society want to deal with you if you weren't willing to have your history out there. I guess we can definitely break this down further next week. I'll kind of rambled on here towards the end, and I'm sorry about it, but should have had my thoughts more cleared up on this issue. But it basically comes down to private arbitration offered in a high tech futuristic society, right? Either we trust the corporations with our private information and our tracking information, or we trust governments, right? I know the two seem scary, but I think with companies, I think it's more plausible to demand, consumer demand in a stateless free market society, contractual society. Consumers will be more educated on what they're buying, and we will ensure that companies, if a company starts losing their personal information or using the personal information of their clients in nefarious ways, then they're going to lose, PR. They're going to lose face when it comes to the public. So it's those checks and balances that Rothbard was talking about, right? Those beautiful checks and balances, the true checks and balances that the market offers, competition offers, and not the crappy monopoly known as the medieval monopoly known as the government, right? That isn't checks and balances. That isn't separation of powers. No. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was yet another episode of the Agora Underground, and we have been covering today Power and Market. We'll be back next week with chapter 2 of it. I do appreciate you guys tuning in, checking out this transmission. Definitely check out Voluntary Virtues and all the other shows that are on here on this network. And check us out. In fact, check our work out too. We are on Facebook, currently working on a web page, but a Facebook page, if you're interested, we got a couple. We got Free San Antonio. We also have Agora's Center of Thought on Facebook, and Agorist of Central Texas, if you're in the Texas area, A.C.T. Definitely check us out. Give us some support. I got another show on Wednesday nights in Austin, Truth Exposed. Check that page out if you're interested. We focus more on this stuff too, as voluntarism as well, anarchy, but throwing a little bit of the conspiracy stuff. So that's always fun. And well, it's not, I don't call it conspiracy, more of the hidden agenda. We'll leave it at that. But again, I do appreciate you guys tuning in, and you know what? Fight the man, guys. Laissez-faire, and catch y'all next week.